how affected are you by the people you hang out with and by your physical environment? We're all a little different, and we're going to talk about that today. So we've been doing a 3-part self-love series, and that's been really great to really do that. I think it's very interesting when we talk about self-love because I look at it a little differently maybe. I don't look at it as like, oh gosh, we should look in the mirror and be like, oh, I'm so amazing, and I love this and I love that. We've really talked about how our first obligation to our soul, that God gave us our soul and he puts it in a body, and our first obligation is to ourselves and to take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so other than like what God says, to love him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and really enjoy that love and that relationship with him, our second job is to learn to love ourselves. And I think it first starts with accepting ourselves, because it can be a big jump to be like, oh, I've gone from being mean to myself and not prioritizing myself to all of a sudden I'm prioritizing myself and talking to myself nicely. And that's why I always say that we're really growing 1% at a time. And so really it starts as a process of first accepting ourselves, accepting our past, accepting things where we are now, and being honest where we're at. And it's not like an acceptance of like, I'm great just where I'm at. It's like, this is where I'm at, having compassion on this. And these are, some things that I don't want to be there in my future, but just an acceptance of that I'm totally loved by God unconditionally and completely valuable, and just having that acceptance. And then just starting to talk to ourselves nicely. So that was one of our first episodes on self-love, was our self-talk. And then the second one was about starting to prioritize ourselves, our thoughts, feelings, desires, and making room for ourselves in the world. And now we're going to talk about our environment, our relational environment and our physical environment, and how we can love ourselves by taking those into consideration. So for me, I find that I'm very affected by my environment. I'm not only affected by my relationships, but I'm also affected by my surroundings. And actually people are to different degrees and different ways, but they find that we're really the reflection of the 5 people we hang out with. For me, having a home that is emotionally safe and physically safe is so important to me. Walking on eggshells like I did for years and years and years was devastating to my nervous system, and having a relationship where conflict was a silent, bloody mess was so destructive to me mentally. And so that was not going to work for me. The interesting thing is we're all a little bit different. Some of us would be considered empaths, where we feel others' feelings a little bit more, or highly sensitive, where I tend to be sensitive to just foods and environment a little bit more than others. And we're all different. And it's great to make room for our differences. So this is really an opportunity to talk, but really I want you to focus on you and ask yourself questions as we're having this conversation about yourself, and to find out how affected are you more or less, and how do you want to intentionally do your environment. So let's talk about relationships first. In order to really know, is this relationship healthy for me? How do I feel about it? It's a couple things. First of all, I think you have kind of a gut feeling, but we have to know ourselves. We have to know what is healthy for us as individuals, and what things are things we won't tolerate in a relationship, in friendships, and kind of have boundaries about that. But a lot of that takes some work and some discovery on ourselves, and what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And I always make mention of the Unravel notebook that is available on Amazon, because that's a great way to do it's a 61-day deep dive, and it helps us to know ourselves, build confidence, and build those healthy relationships with God, self, and others. But really it stems from knowing ourselves and what's important to us. For example, for me, in a romantic relationship, if there is not intimacy, that does not feel good to me. If I can't have the freedom to say, hey, what are you thinking? What's going on? Or if I don't have the freedom to say, hey, I think we may have had a misunderstanding. Can we talk about this? If that wasn't allowed, which honestly that did not occur in my previous relationship, that doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel intimate, and it doesn't feel good, because unfortunately I can sense some things and I never assume, but it's not uncommon that I could be, right. And for example, in my previous relationship, I noticed like this coldness that kept mounting and mounting for 5 years. And finally, he fessed up that, yes, he had been bitter for 5 years over a comment I made 5 years ago. And that it was my fault that he was bitter, even though I didn't even know about the comment. But I could feel those things. I could feel that iciness, and it didn't feel good to me. It was not relaxing. It did not feel like a home, and it wasn't good for me emotionally and physically. So just knowing yourself, and then also creating, once you know yourself, creating boundaries, because it's not uncommon, especially as a kind girl, that we haven't said, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we talk about it? Let's, help me understand this. Or we simply have firm boundaries, which may look like something like, if you continue to do this, this is what I'm going to do, and stick with that. And for example, when my husband and I were dating, I made a very clear boundary. There was an area of his life that he was not happy with, and he was changing with his relationship with alcohol, and he, wanted to not have any alcohol. And he's like, if I do, I see how I work with this relationship. It's not healthy. And I said at the time, I'm like, gosh, if you're so strongly concerned about this, I'll be the first one to go. That means if you've made the choice not to have any alcohol, and if you do, which if he did, when he does, because of his, stomach surgery and different things, he can get drunk like a flash. And, if that were to happen, then I'm going to break up with you. And so I just set a boundary, and a boundary isn't like, I controlling you do, this. It's like, if you do this, then this is what my response is going to be. And I think, and we agreed that seemed reasonable. Well, it happened, and I broke up with him, and he was devastated. And I had no contact with him for, I guess it was quite a few days. And I had his son was very unhappy with me. How could you do that? How could you just da 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 da? But I think it's super important to be able to, say what you mean what you say, and actually do what you say you're going to do. And on my part, I was devastated because I really liked him, and I understand it was just, an act, whatever. But I did not want to set up our relationship in a way that's like, yeah, I said I was going to do this, and I am not going to do that, even though I did feel strongly that was what I needed to do. Thankfully, we were able to work through it, and we're, married and having a great relationship. And I do have clear boundaries in our relationship, and so does he. It's weird to think that in a relationship it should be unconditional love. I think that's foolish. Or at least have unconditional love, but very clear boundaries. However you want to define it, I guess. But Mike and I have very clear boundaries. He's like, and if you have an affair on me, I'm going to divorce you. And that's a very reasonable boundary. And not that there was a problem in that area, but it's just, clear boundaries. And I have some with him. It's like, and if you choose to go down that path, I will not be with you. And that's very healthy. So having boundaries and learning how to have boundaries is really important in a relationship. I highly recommend Terry Cole's book, Boundary Boss. It's always, I read that book probably a couple times a year, just to kind of remind me of the reason why we make healthy boundaries, how do we do healthy boundaries, and kind of scripts to do it. Because as kind girls, it is not natural to have healthy boundaries. So that's the first thing, is relationship, knowing yourself, what is important, creating intentionally having healthy boundaries, and all of that. And then our physical environment, that's another thing to consider. And they very much tie together, because if you have a physical environment home, but you have an emotional relationship that is just toxic and destructive, for me, I just didn't give a shit how great my home was, because this relationship felt so awful that I would have rather lived in a box. But it's very interesting to look at that. But even if you say you have a good relationship, and then you look at your physical environment, it's good to know yourself and know how to make your environment a thriving environment, something that is inspiring to you, that feels loving and feels good. And we're all different. So that's the part where it's like, hey, what works for me? What makes my heart happy? And it's good to really delve into that and give yourself space to do that, because we're all so different. For example, for me, I really like light, and other people really, so I like a house with lots of windows. Other people don't. They actually, like my daughter, she feels like it's more cozy when it's dark. And so everyone is so different. I really like plants. I like the fireplace, and even in the place we're staying now that's temporary, I have like the little electric fireplace, and I just love it. But a fireplace is important to me. I really like that. What I watch to and what I listen to affects me differently than it affects others. For example, I am actually more sensitive to messages in movies or messages in radio, what I'm listening to, music, and other people are less. So everyone is very different. For like my husband, he can listen to the news for an hour and watch it, and it doesn't bother him. For me, I do not want to listen to the news. I want to keep up on what's going on, but just give me the bullet points. I don't want all of the drama, all the information, when it's not something I can do or control, and I'm very compassionate. So that doesn't serve me to do that. And so I'm very intentional about that as well. But we are all so different, and really understanding ourselves and really setting up your environment so you can thrive is important. Have you gone through a breakup that's kind of left you rattled and maybe questioning yourself some? Do you find that you're a pretty kind person that's chronically overgiving, overfunctioning, and maybe you're just plain tired and maybe a little resentful? Do you feel like you're going through the motions of life, but you're not really living your life? Well, that's what the Unravel Notebook is for. It's 61 days for you to create your life by intent and unravel your thoughts and beliefs, so you can connect with God, yourself, and others in a better, more intentional way and live brighter. So I want to give you 2 examples of, we've talked about me and how I had an environment with a relationship and a home that the relationship was really destructive. The home was really pretty, but that didn't matter to me. If a home is not emotionally safe, mentally safe, a healthy environment, that is not good for me. But I have another friend, for example, I'll call her Tina, and Tina's married to an alcoholic, and she used to be anorexic, and she's done so much work on herself, which is just so amazing, because that can be a difficult addiction to overcome. And I've had lots of friends that have actually struggled with that. And she's overcome it. She's got herself really healthy. She's a yoga teacher. And yoga, that's what she would, if you were to ask her and say, hey, what was your key to help you, just your success? She would say, really, yoga and mindfulness. It taught her how to love herself, which I think is always obviously important. That's why we're doing a 3-part self-love series. And like I said, she's married to an alcoholic. She's had 3 kids with him. And she's actually not married. They've just been together for years and years. And I've asked her, I'm like, have you ever thought about, leaving him or whatever? And she's like, of course I've thought about it. And I've chosen not to, because, I have boundaries with him. If he gets drunk and this, I don't drive him home. That's up to him. He can get himself an Uber. I have boundaries on how he treats me and how I am. And I like this environment, this home environment, and I'm happy with my choice right now. And I thought that was great. She's intentionally, worked on herself, and she's chosen to be in an environment that works for her, and because she knows herself, and she's thriving. So I just think that's a really great example of how it can look so differently based on different people. And I always think there's never like a right way or a right, and really just it's about knowing yourself and, that relationship with yourself and God, and going from there. One thing that I think is super important, speaking of there's no necessarily right way, wrong way, is to really watch comparison and comparing yourself to others. Because, it's not uncommon that I hear, I just feel like comparison in general is so destructive, because it's either elevating us or demeaning us, depending on how we're looking at it. And it's never, ever accurate. Because, our souls, this is our home. We know it intimately. Well, sometimes we don't, but I mean, we're supposed to know it intimately. What you see in other people is never a full knowledge. The comparison is never, ever accurate. And so I just see, it can be, and comparison is a habit, and it's a bad habit for the most part, because it's just a habit of, looking for either the bad or good to elevate, demean, never healthy. So if you find yourself comparing, just work on that. I know some people that have gotten off of Instagram or different things just to protect themselves because they know that's a trigger. And I think that's great. Just know how you work. I've made a habit of, like, when I see people for the first time, just to look for something good in them, because I can't never compare. I know it's like apple to orange, so I won't compare. But it's like, oh my goodness, I like her eyes. Oh, I like her purse. I like this. And I built that habit, and I really like that habit, and it's constantly a habit I work on. There is one comparison that I think can be helpful, and that's the comparison that builds the other, that can build each other up. And when you have like two healthy people that are growing, that type of comparison can be really healthy. Like in the Bible, Hebrews 10 talks about how we're supposed to spur one another to love and good deeds and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like that, that type of comparison and helpful. But I find that a lot of times we do this negative comparison that's not healthy and not loving to ourselves and not accurate. So I would just say, scratch that off your list and, don't ever do that. So that's what we talked about today, is creating a healthy environment and how it affects you. And when we talk about the people we're around, and I focused more on our romantic relationship, but it's also other people. Are they draining you regularly? Are they adding to your lives? Do you feel obligated to be around certain people because they're relatives or you've been friends with them for a really long time? I'd really say assess that. That's really, to live the intentional life and to really grow, we have to intentionally take a look at that. And I think as kind girls, like I just heard my kids the other day say that, oh, this person said I should be friends with this other person even though I don't want to, because that's the nice thing to do. And I said, well, I don't think that's very nice at all. In fact, I think that's horrible. I would not want someone to be a friend with me or reach out to me because they felt obligated or they felt like it was the nice thing to do. I want someone to reach out to me and want to hang out with me because they like me. I go, so I think it's kind of deceptive and lying. So it's just another way of looking at it. So really, how are your relationships? How is your environment? Are you in relationship with people that are chronic boundary destroyers? Are they building you up? Are they adding value? Are you adding value? You have a choice, and it's great when you are intentional about those choices. Same with your physical environment. Creating a physical environment that's nurturing to you, that's healthy for you. Another thing I guess I didn't share in my physical environment is I have a Zen den. It's probably, and I don't even know why I call it that, except for that's what I got from Terry Cole. But it's probably only about, I would say, 4 feet by 4 feet. And I've got like my beanbag chair and lights and, nice essential oils. And I do my journaling. And it's just a little space that's myself. And I can, I've got it blocked off in my closet. So it's in my big closet. And I've got it blocked off with a curtain. But it's just a little space for me to really do the work that I just think is so valuable on myself. And that I realize is super healthy for me. And I noticed my husband created his own space, and that's his like little office space. And that's been really valuable for him to have it look the way he wants. And I don't get to move anything or change anything, but have it just be his space. So that's just a way we've created a physical environment. And think about how you can create a physical environment that is nurturing to you and grow 1% a day. I believe in you, and live brighter. Take care.